Hey everyone. It's another week and it's the word. So yeah, the word of the week. This one was kind of cool cuz it was two words that mean the same thing. And those words are ethnocide. No, sorry, not ethnocide. I say ethnocide all the time. No, the words are ethnogenesis and cultural naissance. These are really big words for the philosophy. Um, and it's kind of funny. We haven't like you would think these words we would have said them like really early on, but I think there's like the almost the 20th week of the word, and so we're finally bringing out um, ethnogenesis and cultural naissance. But they're really important words. So here we go. So the words essentially mean the birth of culture. And this is really significant because if you live in a place that does ethnocide, which is, as we all know, the destruction of culture while keeping the people, you have to counter it. And so the obvious word for countering it has been evtopia, and that word still stands. It's a still very very good word. Evtopia is more of like it's like the place. I try to use it as a proper noun and capitalize the e, so it's like a place, like you can make it. Ethnogenesis is more of the action, and I had to think a bit more about ethnogenesis. And I still have a lot of thinking for Evtopia. Just how does Evtopia look, and how does it vary from place to place. But ethnogenesis is like, what are the actions that you do that like create culture? What are the actions you do that not just counter ethnocide and that like it stops it, but like counters it in a way where it creates something. Like, what's that look like? What is that? And so ethnogenesis speaks to that. Cultural naissance also speaks to it too, but the question is all that always gets posed is like, why do you have two words for the same thing? And I like cultural naissance because naissance just means birth, and I think it provides like a linguistic cue to remind people that we're not doing a renaissance, because a renaissance is a rebirth. So you're bringing something back from the past and you're putting it in the present, and that's fixing stuff. So like the Renaissance that the Italians did, they brought back a lot of Greek ideas, and these ideas helped get Europe out of the Dark Ages. And so a lot of times when we talk about Renaissance, we're bringing stuff from the past into the present to have a rebirth of good stuff. Now, if you just look at America and colonization, like this whole place was an attempted rebirth or continuation of European ideas on another continent. And that wasn't idyllic in any way. And so we don't have like a foundation for good over here. And the foundation for good that they tried to put over here, like Europeans, weren't that good. So if we were saying, hi, we're going to get some European idea and bring it to America, and that'll be a rebirth of something, that'll be a renaissance, there's really not a track record of that being like too beneficial. So you have to have a naissance, which is a birth of culture. And so then the question goes like, what does that look like? Like, what is that? Was that on a small scale? Was that at a big scale? How does that look? And I thought about this for a while, and I was doing some research on the Alters Project about 2 years ago, now come to think of it. And I read this book by Octavio Paz called The Labyrinth of Solitude that was about Mexican culture and history. And there was this chapter called Sons of La Malinche, and didn't know who La Malinche was prior to reading this, but she was the indigenous woman who had the first who was the mother of Martin Cortez, Hernan Cortez's son, who was half Spanish, half indigenous, and this person represented the beginning of mestizo people in the Americas. And like to this day, like Mexicans identify as like a mestizo culture, which just means mixed. Um, and I just thought that was fascinating because that was like literally like a birth of culture. Like this Martin Cortez was like the birth of a new distinct culture that's not 100% indigenous, not 100% Spanish. It's new, it's mixed, and this is like the cultural identifier of Mexican people. And that's not to say that Mexico's perfect, where there's not like any sort of racism or prejudice against indigenous people or anything like that. It's just an example of like a new type of people being created that have a new culture. And it happened just right south of America, of the US. And Mexicans are all throughout the US, and they continue mestizo culture. And I was like, that's a birth of culture. That's a macro way to look at it. And then at the same time, the literature, like Mexican people don't go around celebrating Cortez as like the greatest man alive. It's not like, you know, America celebrates Christopher Columbus more than they do Mexico does Cortez. And at the same time, La Malinche, there was a whole slew of literature that was painted her in a negative light. You know, she was like a, they tried to articulate that she was like a traitor to her people, like she sided with Cortez or something, you know, all sorts of, and you know, that narrative has a lot of, you know, sexist, you know, paternalistic, you know, chauvinistic narratives. And so now there's been a whole new like canon of literature that's going around trying to like give a more nuanced, you know, equitable, fair depiction of her. But I found this really provocative because the founding parents, I guess you could say, of mestizo culture are not people that like Mexican people seem to think are that great. Um, and for the US, we like to have these narratives that our founding fathers are like these living deities that are like perfection, and we have to have like these great stories of the George Washington never told a lie and this and that, all this kind of stuff where we really cling to this idea that the people that created our society, created our government, and have to be good people for us to be good people. And that just doesn't make any sense. It makes total sense that they could be horrible people, because they were, and we could still find a way to become good people. And you know, like I know a lot of Mexicans, and they're cool people, and there's no, they're not hindered by the fact that their origin story might not be idyllic, but like that was a culture that got made. And so this really got me thinking quite a bit about culture, and I talk about this in the newsletter, but I could have written like three newsletters with all this stuff regarding ethnogenesis and cultural Naissance. So maybe we'll do some more, follow up ones with the same words. But like as an African American, we're in the position of being constantly oppressed in the U.S. So we always have to make a new type of culture. We always have to do it. That's how we survive. We can't survive off of exploiting the environment. We have to make culture. And so we'll make a new culture. And then that'll graduate to some point, and then it'll get, into the culture industry, and America will try to, turn it into some sort of commodity. And then it slowly, like, we don't own it anymore. It becomes owned by, some factory, some company that's run by, white people for the most part. And then we are tasked with, like, birthing another type of culture and birthing another type of culture. And so, like, the process of black existence in many ways, like this weird, perpetual generation, constantly giving birth to new types of culture. And I think having the word ethnogenesis and cultural naissance puts a bit more clarity on the process of being black, but it also makes it more inclusive to people outside the black community, where they can also participate in creating, engaging in ethnogenesis, cultural naissance, alongside, African Americans and other people in the U.S. And so I think, as the U.S. starts thinking of ways to progress and be more equitable, like one thing we have to really think about is the birthing of like a collective cultural identity, which we don't have. Like we have like a national identity, which is American. Big deal. Like, Mexicans are, Mexico is a country called Mexican, but culturally they'd say that they're mestizo. So, like, you can have a national and a common cultural identity. And, that's just really profound, especially because the U.S., we try to divvy everything up via, like, what the race people are, but not really any consideration for, like, what their culture is. And there's a big, it's like, it's just fascinating, like, if you look at Asian Americans, there's so many different cultures in Asia. They come to the US, and then we just go up, Asian, same, they're all the same, and they end up kind of becoming a group of Asian because we treat them all the same, regardless of the fact that they'll be from completely different parts of Asia and have completely different cultural backgrounds. But, like, because we'll have like a racial conversation, not a cultural one. And so yeah, those are the words. Those are the two words. Ethnogenesis, clearly you can see the connection from ethnocide to ethnogenesis. I think that bridge is really easy for people to, like, wrap their brain around. Linguistically, it makes sense. And then cultural naissance is a very good reminder that we're not going to be rebirthing something. We have to create something new, and it's pretty cool that our neighbors to the south and throughout much of the Caribbean and Latin America have actually engaged in this process of creating a distinct culture. Boom. Oh wow, that's so true. Would ethnogenesis and cultural naissance be anti-capitalistic then, or how would it relate to capitalism in America? Oh yeah, no, it would definitely be like, yeah, it would be anti-capitalistic, but it'd be like a thing that happens before you'd even talk about capitalism. Like, at the end of the day, and now we're gonna have a weird conversation about capitalism, but, like, capitalism is a thing that's just always gonna happen because we can't just barter forever. At some point, I'm gonna need something from somebody else, and I just won't have something that I can trade with him right now. At the very minimum, say if I had something I could trade with him in like a month, I'd have to, like, write on a piece of paper, I owe you this thing, and now we're already creating currency, and so, like, and this is the Marxist perspective on capitalism, but, like, with currency or money, capital is just money in movement. So whether you are in a community, whether you're doing lots of trade, you're going to need to have some sort of currency that can go in movement, and that becomes capital. And so, like America, we're ethnocidal, so we're going to get our money, our capital, and we're going to use it to exploit people, and that's how we're going to understand capitalism. Like, ethnocide really showed that, they want to use capitalism as a way to extract culture from African people, create a chattel slavery system, and have that to be the thing that generates capital. If you have a culture where people have a completely different relationship that's not based on, like, constant exploitation and, like, bad faith engagements, you'll have capitalism. It'll just function differently. There'll be a greater capacity to articulate that money that's moving, maybe it should move from your pocket into the government, because you trust that the government will then get that money together and provide the whole town with services that they need that you individually couldn't provide. And so I'd say that the ethnogenesis cultural naissance process would allow you to engage in capitalism in a way that's less exploitative. So it would be pre-capitalism, not necessarily like anti. How it would relate to capitalism in America? I guess a great example would be our relationship with, like, taxes and giving money to the government. Like, we don't even articulate the government as being part of capitalism, but, like, we do accept that our government says, we support a free market economy. So if the government is coming up with a relationship to capitalism that says we don't want to regulate it, clearly the government has a role in capitalism. So the government could very well have a role that says, I feel it makes a lot of sense to take money out of the market put it in the government so I can disseminate it to the people and give them services that they need. All the people, that would be, if you look at, if you look at like Bernie, if you look at like Bernie Sanders, see if this stays. If you look at like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren's health plan, like Elizabeth Warren is an economist. Her relationship with capitalism was, we're going to take a bunch of money from all these rich people, and we're going to put in the government, we're going to give everybody health care. If you have a collective culture, you understand that helping everybody will be beneficial to sustaining the culture. We could use the word from last week, Ubuntu, where like, I am because we are. That would be like a collective identity, and you would want to spend your money on things that help people collectively, not just I would spend it on myself because I don't trust that if somebody else has money that they'll do something that would be good for me. That's a perspective you have when you don't have like a collective cultural identity. You have an ethnocidal relationship with your environment. Did that answer the question, Luna? Perfect. Okay. Well, if Jackie or Luna, if you guys have any more questions, I'm here. I can answer them. But I will say, I definitely got some feedback from people on this newsletter already today, and they really, awesome. And they all really liked this one, which is cool. So it's always, I get feedback on these newsletters pretty much every week, in emails and stuff, and so it just feels good when you get them, like people text you, email you, and say how much they really enjoyed this one. But yeah, so ethnogenesis, if you are creating a collective identity, your relationship with goods and services and whatnot are going to be in support of sustaining this collective identity that you're creating. And this is very, it's all about existence. And so yeah, so ethnogenesis and cultural naissance. Here's another thing. One of the people that commented today was wondering why I didn't talk about Fricano in this newsletter. And I kind of hit myself. I think I just kind of forgot, or I just ran out of space. I didn't want to make this one too long. But one of our words, Fricano, and if you subscribe to the word, go to the website, you can see it. But like Fricano is an act of ethnogenesis. That is, let's see. So, the point of that word was to create a cultural identifier that was less influenced by ethnocidal identifiers for African diaspora people. And so this Fricano identity is the birth of like a cultural identity where you are expressing, this is the culture of these people, and this culture can have different manifestations and different, nuances based on the various parts in the Americas in which people live. But like one thing that's really interesting about Fricano that I did on purpose, and I'm not sure how it'll evolve, because language, it just evolves in a kind of unpredictable way, is I didn't want to make it racially focused, because it's all about culture, and due to it not being focused on race, it opens a doorway for people who aren't directly of like the African diaspora to identify as Fricano. Or if you are, say you are like want to be in solidarity with black people or Fricano people, you could say I am Fricano too, or I commune or associate with Fricano, and now boom, like it linguistically allows for like a new cultural identity that is beyond race to exist for people. And like that's really, really big. And then that identity has a narrative behind it. The narrative itself isn't idyllic, but it's factual, and we're just coming to making the best or being genuine. about the origin of people in the Americas. And so, um, that was a manifestation of of my ethnogenesis, cultural Naissance ideas. And so like that word is one of like the earliest um, attempts at manifesting it. But there's plenty of other things that SCL is planning on doing that follows along this, and it kind of, if you have ethnocide, if you live in an ethnocidal place and you're trying to cultivate like ethtopian space, you know, ethnogenesis and cultural Naissance are like the practice, the steps in the journey that you need to do to make a good place. And you have to have a collective culture where people can articulate the benefit for themselves and the community to work together. And so yeah, so you know maybe we might need to do another word that's Fricano and ethnogenesis or something. I don't know, but yeah. So that's the word for the week, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. But yeah, those are just two of our new words, and that's really it. But if you guys don't have any questions, then I think I answered everything. I don't know. But yeah, so did you really? Oh, I see it. Oh, oh, yep, I see that question. When do you consider a society or country having reached cultural naissance? Like when a new culture identifier is created and used by the people, or once it's added to law? That's a good question. So, let's see. Reaching is it's an interesting word to use. Um, hmm. So it's a thing that always it evolves. It's not static. It changes. I think it's more so the understanding that it's a process that you need to engage in. So, for example, so like Europe's a good example, and I use Europe a lot just because as an American I've gotten way more education on like European stuff than the rest of the world. So that's not in any way to say that like Europe's better than some other place. But like when you think of France or something, or like the word France, that's a cultural identity that was created there. Actually, Italy could be better. Like Rome. If you talk about Rome, like they have the story of like Romulus and Remus, and this their mythology, and this is how the city of Rome came into being. Like that is the creation of culture that has an attachment to that place that's distinct, and all the people there value that. How that culture evolves over time is always going to be part of the process, and people are going to make new culture. That culture is going to evolve. I think the key thing for the Americas is that natural process that pretty much is just foundational for civilization anywhere else. We don't do it, and we don't have. Excuse me. One second. We don't have the language for articulating what it is and why we should do it. And so that basic foundational cultural creation, birth of culture, the Americas, especially the US, doesn't really do it. And what we end up trying to do is replicate the culture of like, an ocean away. And so here, it's very important to have that language so that people have an awareness of something that they need to do that's counter to what we've been instructed to do for a very long time. But like one thing, if you look at lots of Latin America, they've gone through the process, and people that have freed themselves from colonization have also gone through the process of creating a new culture. And so like Puerto Rico, like Puerto Ricans, that's their, not their national identity, but like their political nation state identity is Puerto Rico. But they wouldn't call them, they will say they're Puerto Rican, but culturally they'd say they're Boricua. And Boricua is, that name derives from the Taino Indians that lived on that island and called that island Boricuan. And so when the people that lived on that island had the opportunity to come up with their own identity that was culturally inclusive to all the people there, like you can be Boricua and it's not racially specific. That doesn't mean that there aren't racial problems in Puerto Rico, but they created it. If you look at Haiti, once the Haitians kicked all the French out, they had to create a name, and that name, Haiti, derives from the Arawak Indians who lived there. And so it's just a pretty organic process that a lot of places in the Americas have already engaged in, and the US just doesn't have that same desire. It's very much a national identity and racial distinctions. And I think that's just a very significant impediment for us as a society. And another key thing is, like in the Americas, when people are engaging in this in ethnogenesis, cultural Naissance, they understand the importance of incorporating the indigenous people into that narrative. Like mestizo, indigenous, is a key part of it. Haiti, indigenous, key a part of it. Puerto Rico, same thing. Here, we still have a narrative that wants to make it seem as though indigenous people just don't exist, and that really does not allow you to engage in cultural Naissance or ethnogenesis. Like this process, we're going to end up having to make something that's brand new. It's never existed before. But we do that all the time in America, and we just don't think about it. Like the other day, not the other day, what am I talking about? It was like a couple years ago, I was at, it's like a friend of mine's going away party. They're moving from DC, and I was talking to this Asian guy, and I think he was Korean, and he was from Alabama, and I'm from Georgia, and we were talking about just like how the South is weird, and how like growing up, I think I had like one Asian friend, and I didn't really know like where in Asia he was from, because like the South doesn't teach you anything about Asia. It's just like everyone's Asian. And this Asian guy looks at me, he's like, yeah, I'm from Alabama, and he said, I'm not joking, growing up, he thought he was Chinese because all the Alabama people just told him he was Chinese. Even though he was Korean, he thought he was Chinese. He had to be reminded that he was actually Korean, because when your parents are the only Korean people in the whole city, basically, and everyone else around you saying you're Chinese, you might start believing you're Chinese. Anyways, this guy was getting married, and his wife was Indian. Not indigenous, like India from Asia. And I asked him, like, do you think in the history of your family and her family that like an Indian person and a Korean person have like gone together? And he said, no, not at all. I was like, so you guys are making something that's like brand new in the history of your whole family? And he was like, yeah, never really thought about it. And like, I think that just happens a lot, where we do it, we just don't think about it, we don't have a language for it, which then means we can't take it to like that next level and make it have more meaning and more structure and more impact. And so I don't think it's something that you reach. I think it's something that you become like aware of, and you consciously engage in it in like a beneficial way. But it's not like you reach it and you're done. It's just the process of creating birth of culture, and then you just keep on doing it, So, it's like, but I guess another thing, just like if you're having like it's like if you're making a family. If you have one kid, gave birth to a kid, yeah, you have another kid, you don't say that like that's a rebirth. That's just like another birth. You're doing it again. That's the process. And so that's that. And I think that's an essential way of countering ethnocide. So I hope that answered that question. I give long answers, but that's just how I talk and think. But yeah, if anyone, I saw one person showed up after the beginning, so if there's any refreshers, I can talk about the beginning, the words a little bit more. But ethnogenesis, cultural naissance, meaning the birth of culture, and it's a key thing for countering ethnocide. And a lot of places. Another thing that here's a good one. Here's another story. So this is in relation to my book, but some people didn't understand what I was trying to say, and when I was talking about ethnocide and the destruction of cultures, someone responded that but there's a lot of African Americans that were able to keep their African culture. And this person referenced, how about the Gullah Geechee people? They still have their African culture, and this is I think how a lot of Americans think about this stuff. So Gullah Geechee people are from Charleston, South Carolina. My family's actually Gullah Geechee, and what that means, what that culture is basically Charleston was one of the biggest slave port cities in America, and people it's really marshy and there's a lot of islands, so there was really not easy, but it was easier for slaves to escape to those islands off the shore and live as free people. And this helped create a vibrant community of free Black people and enslaved Black people that all mixed together, and it created this unique Gullah Geechee community that still had kept some of their African cultural traditions. But one of the biggest movies about Gullah Geechee people is called Daughters of the Dust, and it's about the tension between Gullah Geechee people who lived in the Sea Islands away and ones that lived on the mainland that became more European. And so when I told my mom that this editor person wanted to say that Gullah Geechee culture was just African culture, but in America, my mom thought this was hilarious and completely wrong, because if Gullah Geechee's African, then go to Africa and find me some Gullah Geechee people. And you can't, because it's a distinctly new type of culture that was born in the US. And if you ask a Mexican person, they speak Spanish, but if you say your culture is basically just Spanish culture over here, they'd say, get out of here, that's crazy. Clearly there are Spanish influences, I can speak Spanish and there's stuff, but we do X and they do Y, we do this, they do that, we do this, they do that. And we don't have that discourse here. If Black people do something that has an obvious connection to Africa, we articulate it as that's African culture here, when instead it should be, this is a type of American culture that has African culture in it as a part of it, but there's this and this and this and this and this. And if we don't have the words ethnogenesis or cultural naissance, or even the word for the distinct culture, then it makes it really hard for people to articulate these really profound cultural shifts. And it's and when you think of ethnogenesis, cultural naissance, it's easy to think about all the new cultures that have formed in the Americas since colonization that are just brand new, just due to the mixing of the people. And so yeah, those are the words. Yeah, if there's no questions, I'm cool. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. I'm glad I answered your questions, and subscribe to the Word, shoot me emails, message us on Instagram, Twitter, all that stuff, and I hope these are helpful. So no more questions. I'll sign off. Hope you guys have a really good weekend or what's left of it. And, see you next week. Bye.